this is a concern of a lot of people today, and I think it's partly responsible, maybe wholly responsible, for the rise of reform and even Rupert Lowe's restore further to the right, if you can call it the right, is that as we increasingly have people from other cultures in this country, particularly Islam, which amounts to around 10% of the population now, those cultures here will change, and the laws and the way that we apply them will start to change. I'm thinking of blasphemy laws. I'm thinking of Islamophobia, hate speech.
Well, I mean, it shouldn't have that significant a consequence, provided that we have a coherent view about what the limits of free speech are. It's extremely important that one should have what one might grandly call a philosophy of free speech, because otherwise, if you just allow it to be decided on a sort of ad hoc basis with no consistency at all, what we end up doing is banning certain kinds of speech because we don't like its content. And I think that if you take free speech as an example, the traditional view of English law, which confines it to cases where the speech provokes a breach of the peace, you then do not start preferring Christian speech to Islamic speech, for example. And I think that that actually assists. It certainly doesn't hamper the process of living together in one society with radically different views.
Well, just last week, I think they were saying in schools now, I know this is not a legal matter, but in schools, children are now to be prohibited from depicting Jesus so as not to offend Muslims.
Yes, well, I think that's absurd and outrageous.
This is the kind of...
But it's a matter of... that is not a government policy. It's a policy which some schools have imposed.
But is that not a change in the culture that we spoke about?
Well, it would be a change in the culture if it were to become widespread, or if it were to extend beyond schools. But I don't think there's any sign of that at the moment.
There's the Labour's new Islamophobia policy, inciting hatred against Muslims would be.
Yes, well, it's actually more complex than that, and it does recognise that it's not enough to provoke abuse or even hatred. You've got to do it in circumstances liable to provoke violence, and that seems to me to be consistent with rational thinking on this subject.
I hope that's the case. I mean, can you see why people are concerned?
That's what I can see why people are concerned, and the drafts of this policy, which have so far seen the light of day, seem to me to be consistent with the traditional view. What will ultimately emerge is anyone's guess.
Why do you think it was? I think his name was Hamid Koskin, the man who burned the Quran. The Crown Prosecution Service. Why did they go back in to try and sort of nab him?
The Crown Prosecution Service, some years ago, agreed with the police on a subjective view about what constituted a hate crime, which was similar to the view that underlay non-crime hate incidents that we discussed a moment ago. And you can see it today on their website. They take the view that a hate crime is anything that is criminal and that is motivated by something which the victim or anyone else would regard as motivated by hatred. The Crown Prosecution Service has had a policy in agreement with the police which goes way beyond the current law. That's presumably why they decided to appeal the Koskin case, because Mr. Koskin was exonerated by the Crown Court on appeal from the magistrates. And it was the Crown Prosecution Service that decided to appeal to the High Court. Essentially, what they sought to do was to vindicate the policy expressed in their public statements, and they failed. And in my view, they rightly failed. They have said that they are considering a further appeal. I question whether they will appeal, and I question even more strongly whether if they do, they will succeed.
It feels like why this obsession with they need to get this guy. They need to.
Mr. Koskin himself is not a particularly important figure. I don't think it's motivated by a desire to get in. I think it's motivated by a desire to increase the range of cases in which the content of somebody's speech, rather than the circumstances in which it's delivered, justify its being banned. And I think that is very unfortunate. The point about Mr. Koskin's case is that he burnt the Quran in a place, an empty street in Knightsbridge, in which the only person who seems to have noticed what he was doing was somebody in a neighboring building who rushed out and tried to stab him. And that person was subsequently, and quite rightly, convicted of an aggravated assault and given a suspended sentence of imprisonment. No problem about that. But if you ask the question, was it reasonable to expect Mr. Koskin's act in an empty Knightsbridge street to provoke a breach of the peace? The only sensible answer you can give is no. But that wasn't a test that the Crown Prosecution Service liked. They wanted a wider test to show that if you said something that was offensive to people by reason of its content, rather than its likely impact on the king's peace, then you should be criminalized. And it seems to me that we should applaud the fact that that argument was rejected.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I mean, it's very worrying that we've got a CPS who seems so intent on impinging upon.
Well, it's not so worrying because their views only matter so far as they're endorsed by the courts, and the courts have refused to endorse it so far.
Well, it's still a reflection of a culture that they can even try so hard to.
It's certainly based on a desire to vindicate a policy which they have held and published for quite a number of years. But the courts exist in order to decide whether that's consistent with the law.
We've got a situation at the moment where, I alluded to the increase in Islam in this country. We have situations like the Israeli football team unable to play in Birmingham.
Yes.
We have policing issues.
That may well have been, the facts remain a bit unclear, at least to me. That may well have been due to a piece of incompetence on the part of the police when they gave the relevant advice to the local authority.
But it feels like that. I mean, I'm talking more about the police than the law now, but it feels like they're unable, and I actually have sympathy with them. They're unable now to enforce certain laws. There's also a lot of protests where they've just had to say, like, we just can't. We can't stop anti-Semitism, for example. We can't stop this.
Well, I mean, you can't stop anti-Semitism. It's unfortunately a sentiment that is quite widespread. It usually takes non-violent form. It usually takes the form of offensive but ultimately harmless prejudice. It occasionally takes a more unpleasant and more violent form, resulting in either in violence or in discrimination. And both of those are forbidden by law. And I don't think any sensible person would question the fact that they're forbidden by law.